A9850 in state business. Kobus Koekemoer, accused in person. Accused number 2, Louisa Koekemoer. Accused number 2, represented by Mr. Nel.
Wie wil draai?
No bail.
Hello everyone, and welcome. As an experienced crime analyst and storyteller, I share real-life cases with the goal of raising awareness, promoting safety, and helping our community learn valuable lessons about prevention. Today we will take a look at the case of Poppie Vanderway and explore the latest developments. Her body lay still. What do we do? The voice on the other end of the phone was panicked, trembling. But by the time first responders reached the small farmhouse, it was already too late. What they saw inside would stay with them for the rest of their lives. A seasoned detective, someone who had seen more than his share of tragic scenes, had to step outside to compose himself. "I thought I was hardened," he later said. But this was different. The image of a little girl, barely 3 years old, covered in marks and lying lifeless, was more than any parent or investigator could bear. What makes this case even more haunting is that it didn't come out of nowhere. There were warning signs everywhere: bruises hidden under long sleeves, teachers asking quiet questions, neighbors making desperate calls for help. Yet each time the danger was minimized, explained away, or lost in red tape. And this wasn't an isolated family tucked away in a remote forest. This was a community where people waved to each other at the grocery store and sat together at church. The children in this family were seen, even loved by those around them. But behind closed doors they lived in fear, and no one knew just how bad it truly was until the very worst happened. Even now, those who knew this family ask themselves the same heartbreaking question: could this little girl have been saved if someone had just acted sooner? Or was it already too late by the time the system stepped in? This is the story of a child who deserved so much more, and of the opportunities that were missed to protect her. It is also a story about why speaking up and following through can be the difference between life and death. Before we begin, I need to warn you. What you're about to hear is deeply disturbing, but telling this story matters because every time we shine a light on these failures, we move one step closer to preventing another tragedy like this from happening again. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss cases like this. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It helps us connect with this incredible community. Poppie Vanderwee was just 3 years old at the time of her passing. She lived with her 5-year-old brother, Johan, in a household that, on the surface, seemed like any other. Those who saw the siblings in public often described them as bright-eyed children, shy at times, but outwardly normal. You couldn't have imagined the turbulence that shaped their young lives behind closed doors. To understand how the circumstances in their household developed, it is important to examine the life of their mother, Louisa Koekemoer. Louisa's childhood was marked by instability. She grew up in a home overshadowed by conflict and neglect. After her father died when she was young, Louisa's mother remarried a man who was known for his strict and controlling temperament. Family members would later recall that Louisa often felt unwanted and unsupported, an experience that left deep psychological scars. When Louisa reached adulthood, she was determined to leave that environment behind. At a young age, she married Freddie, a man 4 years older than her. But this relationship quickly proved toxic. Friends close to the couple later recounted frequent arguments and controlling behavior from Freddie. Louisa, unable to find the stability she craved, eventually left the marriage. Hoping to start over, she later entered a relationship with Christo Vanderwee. Christo initially appeared caring and responsible. The two settled down and started a family together. Their son Johan was born first, followed by their daughter Poppie 2 years later. At this point, Louisa appeared to be building the stable family life she had always wanted. But within months of Poppie's birth, the relationship deteriorated. Christo's behavior changed. He became more confrontational and unpredictable. Louisa filed for separation and eventually obtained a court order to keep him from approaching her. She retained custody of both children, though Christo was granted supervised visits a few times a month. With her marriage to Christo dissolved, Louisa sought to rebuild her life once again. In search of a fresh start, she moved with Jan and Poppie to Orania, a small, close-knit community in South Africa's northern Cape Province. Orania was known for its conservative values and its self-sufficient population. Many in the town were members of the Dutch Reformed Church, which played a significant role in the community's social structure. Neighbors knew one another by name, and new arrivals often received assistance to settle in. When Louisa arrived in Orania, members of the Dutch Reformed Church helped her secure a modest home and find a position at a local supermarket. She brought with her Marissa, the teenage daughter from one of her previous relationships. Marissa, who was 14 at the time, became a steady presence in the household and a source of comfort to Poppie and Johan. She took on a caregiver role, helping with daily routines and easing the pressure on Louisa as she adjusted to her new environment. During this period, Louisa met a man named Kobus Koekemoer. Like Louisa, Kobus had a complicated personal history. He had been divorced twice and had children from previous relationships. Acquaintances later described him as quiet, reserved, and difficult to get to know, but he quickly grew close to Louisa. The relationship moved forward rapidly, and within months, Kobus proposed marriage. Louisa accepted. After their wedding in November 2015, Kobus moved into the home with Louisa, Johan, Poppie, and Marissa. However, the household dynamic changed immediately. The day after the wedding, Kobus insisted that Marissa, who had been a vital source of support for the younger children, leave the home. He put her on a bus to live with her biological father. The removal of Marissa, who had been a trusted caregiver to Johan and Poppie, left a noticeable void. This shift marked a significant change in the family's daily life. Neighbors and acquaintances would later say that the children appeared quieter and more withdrawn without Marissa's presence. Kobus, now the primary male figure in the household, set strict rules and there was little room for discussion. Louisa, newly married and attempting to maintain the appearance of a stable family unit, complied with Kobus's decisions. By the end of 2015, the family appeared settled in Orania to outsiders. Louisa had a steady job, the children were enrolled in local programs and they attended church regularly. But the absence of Marissa, coupled with Kobus's increasing control over the household, marked the beginning of a very different reality for Poppie and Johan, one that few in the community could see from the outside. By late 2015, the household had entered a period of strict control. Over the following months, from September 2015 through October 2016, multiple signs of concern began to emerge. Neighbors, educators, and even professionals who interacted with the family noticed patterns that were deeply troubling, yet each sign on its own seemed to be explained away or dismissed. One of the family's neighbors, a man named Jacko Roux, would later provide some of the most critical testimony about this period. Jacko lived close enough to occasionally overhear activity from the home. He recalled incidents that alarmed him, moments that revealed an increasingly tense environment inside the house. On one occasion during the colder months, he observed the children standing outside while being sprayed with cold water from a garden hose. The reason, he was told, was discipline. He remembered thinking that such a punishment was dangerous given the temperature, but he wasn't in a position to intervene directly. There were other instances Jacko could not forget. He often heard the children cry after wetting their beds. The sound was followed by shouting, and what he described as long periods of silence afterward, leaving him uneasy. On more than one occasion, he noticed that Poppie was struggling to walk properly, appearing to limp or favor one side of her body. These moments convinced him that something was very wrong. He began raising concerns with those he thought could help, but nothing seemed to change. The concerns were not limited to the neighbors. Staff at the kindergarten attended by Jan and Poppie noticed that both children displayed clear signs of fear at pickup time. Teachers reported that Johan would sometimes hide in the bathroom or refuse to leave with his parents. They also know that Poppie often arrived dressed in long sleeves or layers, even on warm days. When staff attempted to help her remove the extra clothing, she became anxious, clinging to the garments as though afraid of what would happen if she was seen without them. Educators asked questions, hoping for answers that would put their minds at ease, but the explanations they received from Louisa and Kobus were consistent and rehearsed. The children, they were told, were simply accident-prone and active. Bruises and limping, they said, were the result of falls or rough play. Without direct evidence of wrongdoing and bound by protocols that required escalation through formal channels, the staff felt powerless. Medical professionals were among those who could have intervened. Poppie and Johan were occasionally seen by doctors, but the subtle warning signs were missed or overlooked. One physician noted injuries that seemed inconsistent with typical childhood accidents, yet no formal report was filed. A minister from the family's church was also made aware of possible problems in the home. He later admitted he was conflicted about how to respond. Without definitive proof, he feared intervening would make things worse. It was only later that these missed opportunities would be fully understood. The Go Purple Foundation, a child protection organization, would ultimately file charges against professionals who had direct knowledge of the children's condition but failed to report it to law enforcement. Their view was that these individuals, by staying silent, allowed the situation to continue unchecked. The picture that emerged from these accounts was one of growing isolation and fear for the children. Each time someone tried to raise a concern, the explanation offered by Louisa and Kobus was enough to delay action. The family presented a stable image to the outside world, attending church regularly and maintaining steady employment. For many in the community, the outward appearance masked the underlying reality. But as these warning signs accumulated, neighbors and others in Orania began to sense that something was seriously wrong. The tension in the community was rising, and soon the pressure would become so intense that Louisa and Kobus disappeared from Orania without warning, leaving behind a community full of unanswered questions. After months of growing suspicion in Orania, Louisa and Kobus made a sudden decision to leave the community. There was no prior notice, no goodbyes to neighbors or church members. They simply vanished overnight. When questioned later, community members said it was as if the family had been trying to escape the watchful eyes that were beginning to focus on them. The couple relocated to a rural area near Britt, close to Hopetown, where they believed they could live without interference. The move significantly changed the children's daily lives. Jan and Poppie, who had once attended kindergarten and participated in community activities, were now cut off from structured education and regular contact with outsiders. Their world became confined to the household with no teachers or trusted adults to notice anything amiss. This isolation removed one of the few safety nets they had, leaving them dependent on Louisa and Kobus for everything. Extended family members did notice concerning changes. During a visit, Louisa's mother saw both Johan and Poppie and was shocked by how fearful and withdrawn they appeared. She noticed signs that something was wrong and tried to raise the issue, but Louisa quickly dismissed her concerns. She insisted the children were fine and accused her mother of overreacting. Out of fear of pushing her daughter away completely, the grandmother refrained from taking further action. Neighbors in the Britain Hopetown area began to observe troubling patterns similar to those noted in Orania. People living nearby reported hearing raised voices and the sound of children crying late at night. Some neighbors recalled seeing the children alone outside, unusually quiet and hesitant to interact. Those who tried to engage with them noticed the children rarely made eye contact and often seemed tense in the presence of adults. Reports of inappropriate boundaries in the household also surfaced. According to accounts later shared in court, Johan and Poppie were forced to share a bedroom with Louisa and Kobus and were exposed to adult behavior that no child should witness. These details painted a picture of an environment where the children had no privacy, no sense of security, and no opportunity to escape the constant tension inside the home. Despite these warning signs, nothing was done to intervene. There were no school officials to check on the children's well-being, no medical appointments to provide opportunities for disclosure, and no strong community ties in the new area to prompt accountability. The isolation allowed Louisa and Kobus to maintain complete control over the household without outside scrutiny. As weeks turned into months, the situation worsened. Neighbors who had already raised concerns became increasingly alarmed by what they were witnessing. Their reports of children in distress became more frequent and more urgent, but without direct evidence, no decisive action was taken. The children's world had become frighteningly small. They were separated from the teachers and caregivers who had once noticed the warning signs, and even extended family members were being pushed away. This complete lack of oversight set the stage for the events that would follow, events that would shock the country and leave a community forever questioning whether more could have been done. If this story already feels important, take a second to subscribe, because what comes next is something no child should endure. Sharing these stories helped spread awareness and protect others. On October 24, 2016, tensions in the household escalated. According to later testimony, the incident began when Kobus became frustrated with Poppie over something minor. Louisa, sensing the situation was deteriorating, asked him repeatedly to calm down and not to discipline the children. Those requests were ignored. Witness accounts presented in court and Louisa's own statements revealed that Kobus was strict and controlling in his approach. During this confrontation, Kobus became aggressive, and Poppie suffered a serious head injury. She became unusually quiet and subdued afterwards, behavior that deeply concerned Louisa. Despite these warning signs, no medical care was sought. On the morning of October 25, 2016, the atmosphere in the household was tense. Poppie, just 3 years old, appeared noticeably unwell. She was lethargic and struggled to keep up with her usual routine. Louisa, seeing her daughter's condition, was visibly concerned. She later admitted that she pleaded with Kobus not to confront or discipline the children that day, hoping to give them time to rest. Those pleas, however, went unheeded. According to witness testimony and investigative findings, Kobus maintained a strict, uncompromising approach when it came to the household. That morning was no exception. He dismissed Louisa's concerns, insisting that maintaining order and rules was more important. Louisa's reluctance to challenge him directly meant that she allowed him to continue despite fearing the consequences. As the day went on, Poppie's condition worsened. She became weaker and struggled to stay upright. It was only when she collapsed entirely that Louisa and Kobus realized the gravity of the situation. Instead of seeking immediate help, valuable time passed before they decided to act. When they finally rushed her to the small Brit hospital later that afternoon, it was too late. Hospital staff immediately recognized the severity of the situation. Poppie had already passed away before reaching the hospital, and the attending nurses and doctors quickly realized there was nothing they could do to save her. What they observed in that examination room raised serious concerns. Her condition was inconsistent with the explanations given by Louisa and Kobus. Questions were asked, but the answers they received did not match what they were seeing. It wasn't just Poppie's condition that alarmed the staff. Johann, her 5-year-old brother, was visibly frightened. He clung to the corner of the room, avoiding eye contact and staying as far as possible from Louisa and Kobus. When approached by nurses, he appeared anxious and withdrawn, behavior that only deepened the suspicion of those present. By the time the initial assessment was complete, the medical team knew they were dealing with a situation that required law enforcement involvement. They made the call to local authorities, setting in motion an investigation that would uncover a chain of failures and decisions leading to this point. The events of that day marked the beginning of a case that would horrify the nation and force a community to confront the warning signs it had missed. The questions now shifted to how a child could have reached this point without intervention, and whether anyone could have stepped in before it was too late. When local police arrived at the hospital, they immediately understood the gravity of what they were walking into. The attending medical team had already briefed them on the inconsistencies between Poppie's condition and the explanations provided by Louisa and Kobus. Detectives knew this was no ordinary case. What they were about to uncover would reveal a pattern of neglect, missed opportunities, and systemic failures that had spanned months. Detectives began by gathering as much information as they could from hospital staff who detailed the inconsistencies they had observed. Louisa and Kobus were questioned on site about the events leading up to Poppie's collapse. Their accounts were vague, lacking detail, and often contradicted one another. This alone was enough for investigators to treat the case as suspicious from the outset. As the investigation progressed, forensic specialists began their examinations. The findings were troubling. Poppie's injuries were not isolated to a single event. Instead, evidence showed that she had endured harm over a long period of time. There were clear signs of injuries at different stages of healing, indicating a pattern of mistreatment that predated her collapse. The forensic team determined that a severe head injury was the primary cause of her death. This injury was consistent with the events that had reportedly taken place in the household the day before. To build a clearer picture, investigators conducted interviews with individuals who had interacted with the family. Neighbor Jacko Rue provided detailed testimony about his concerns in the months prior. He recalled specific incidents where he had witnessed troubling punishments and heard cries from the children. His account corroborated the forensic findings that injuries had occurred over time. The children's grandmother was also interviewed. She described her growing alarm when she last saw Poppie and Johan and how her attempts to raise the issue with Louisa were dismissed. Teachers from the children's former kindergarten confirmed that they too had noticed signs of fear and injuries that had been explained away by the parents. These interviews painted a consistent picture. The warning signs had been present for months, but the system had failed to intervene effectively. One of the most critical interviews was conducted with Johan, Poppie's 5-year-old brother. Trained child investigators met with him in a safe environment where he could share what he knew without fear. Johan described a household where strict discipline was a daily occurrence. He spoke about incidents that aligned with the injuries found during the forensic examination. His testimony gave investigators an inside view of what life had been like for both him and his sister in the months leading up to her death. With the forensic evidence, eyewitness testimony, and Johan's statement, investigators had enough to take decisive action. Kobus was arrested immediately. Louisa was initially questioned further as detectives sought to determine her level of involvement. Following additional interviews and a review of the evidence, she was also taken into custody. But as the trial approached, it became clear this case was about more than two parents accused of harming a child. It was about every person and system that had failed to act in time. When the case reached the courts, it was immediately clear this would not be a straightforward trial. Attorneys in the Northern Cape were hesitant to take on the defense. Several declined outright, citing the nature of the allegations. It took weeks before legal representation could be secured for Louisa and Kobus, delaying the proceedings and underscoring the gravity of the charges they faced. The prosecution began by methodically piecing together the full timeline of events leading up to Poppie's death. Investigators presented the forensic evidence first, detailed reports showing injuries and varying stages of healing, evidence that pointed to harm occurring repeatedly over a prolonged period. These findings were supported by medical experts who testified that the final fatal injury was consistent with a serious blow to the head. Next came the testimony of those who had seen the warning signs but were unable or in some cases unwilling to intervene. Neighbor Jacko took the stand and described what he had witnessed from his own property: troubling punishments, children crying, and visible signs of fear. He recalled trying to raise concerns but said he felt powerless when nothing was done. Teachers from the children's former kindergarten followed. They spoke about Jan and Poppie's withdrawn behavior in the classroom, their reluctance to go home, and the visible marks they had observed. When asked why they did not escalate the matter further, some admitted they had believed the explanations given by Louisa and Kobus at the time. The grandmother's testimony was one of the most poignant. She described her deep unease the last time she saw the children alive and her regret over not taking stronger action. Her account gave the court an intimate glimpse of how the family had become isolated from those who might have been able to help. Judge Bert Bam presided over the trial and listened intently as the evidence mounted. He remarked during the proceedings that the case had to be viewed as a mosaic of evidence. Each piece on its own might not have been enough, but together they formed an undeniable picture of what had happened. He described Louisa and Kobus as inherently evil, noting their complete lack of remorse and their failure to protect Poppie, even when given countless opportunities to do so. Louisa's legal team attempted to mitigate her role, arguing that she was a product of her own abusive upbringing and had been controlled by Kobus. She claimed that she had been unable to stop him and that fear had dictated her actions. The judge, however, was unmoved. He pointed out that Louisa had multiple chances to intervene, to seek help for her children, or to remove them from danger. In May 2018, Judge Bam delivered his verdict. Both Louisa and Kobus were found guilty of a crime and sentenced to life imprisonment. Each also received an additional 10 years for child abuse charges, sentences that would run concurrently with their life terms. The judge made it clear that their actions, or in Louisa's case, her inaction, had directly led to Poppie's death, and that the maximum penalty was the only appropriate response. The trial may have ended with Louisa and Kobus receiving life sentences, but the fight for accountability was far from over. In the months that followed, the Go Purple Foundation, one of South Africa's most active child protection organizations, took a bold stand. They refused to let the story end there. After carefully reviewing the evidence presented in court, the foundation uncovered a disturbing reality. There were multiple professionals, people who had seen the warning signs with their own eyes, who had never escalated their concerns. Teachers, a doctor, even a church minister. All of them had crossed paths with Poppie and Johan in the months before her death, and all had opportunities to raise the alarm. Yet none had done so in time. In December 2017, the Foundation filed formal charges against these individuals, accusing them of failing to meet their mandatory reporting duties. It was an extraordinary move, one that sent a powerful message across the country. Accountability doesn't stop with the perpetrators. If a child's life is in danger, silence can be just as damaging. For the Go Purple Foundation, this was about more than one case. Their campaign called for stricter laws, stronger training, and a cultural shift that would empower teachers, doctors, and clergy to act when they suspect a child is at risk. Their message was clear: protecting children requires vigilance from everyone, not just the people inside the home. By the time the legal process concluded, the case had become a national wake-up call. Communities across South Africa were asking themselves hard questions. How did this happen? How could so many adults see the warning signs and still fail to act? And most importantly, what would it take to make sure it never happens again? The emotional toll of the case was perhaps felt most deeply by Poppie's biological father, Christo Vanderwa. He had long been separated from Louisa and had limited contact with his children, but the news of Poppie's death devastated him. During the investigation, audio recordings of phone calls he had shared with his daughter were revealed. In these calls, Poppie's voice carried a tenderness that deeply moved everyone who heard it, a reminder of a bond that had been strained by distance and circumstance. Christo spoke openly about his regret and grief, expressing that he would never be able to undo the separation that had kept him from his children. In the months following the trial, Christo became an outspoken advocate for stronger child protection laws. He participated in awareness campaigns, speaking at community events and urging parents and professionals to act when they suspect a child may be in danger. His voice became a powerful reminder that failing to step in can have irreversible consequences. The small community of Arania, where the family had once lived, also struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. Many of its members felt a deep sense of guilt, questioning whether they could have done more when they noticed the warning signs. That guilt turned into anger for some. Before Poppie's funeral, a vigilante attack was carried out on Louisa by individuals posing as police officers. The incident shocked the public, further reflecting the raw emotions the case had stirred. Despite this, the community channeled its grief into pushing for better awareness of child safety issues. Churches, schools, and local organizations began hosting workshops on mandatory reporting laws and how to recognize signs of neglect or harm. Community leaders made a collective effort to ensure no other child would go unnoticed or unheard. This movement of accountability and reform marked a turning point. While nothing could undo the loss, the case had ignited a determination among families and professionals alike to act swiftly and decisively if they ever encountered a similar situation. The case of Poppie Vandera revealed the devastating impact of systemic failures. Multiple people and institutions had opportunities to step in, but each missed moment allowed the situation to continue unchecked. Teachers noticed changes in the children's behavior but accepted explanations given to them. Medical professionals observed injuries but did not escalate their concerns. A church minister became aware of possible problems but chose to remain silent. These lapses, combined with insufficient communication between agencies, ultimately left Poppie without the protection she needed. The lesson from this case is clear. Hidden dangers can exist even in environments that seem safe and familiar. Children are often harmed by those they know and trust, making it all the more important for communities to be vigilant. Recognizing subtle warning signs, withdrawal, unexplained injuries, fear of going home, is critical. Just as important is the willingness to act even when doing so feels uncomfortable or inconvenient. The public outcry following the trial prompted renewed calls for reform. Child protection organizations pushed for stricter training for teachers, healthcare providers, and clergy, emphasizing the legal and ethical responsibility to report suspected harm immediately. The Go Purple Foundation's decision to lay charges against professionals who failed to act was a significant step toward reinforcing those responsibilities. Awareness campaigns spread through schools and community centers, teaching adults how to identify and respond to potential dangers. Some regions strengthened their reporting mechanisms, ensuring that concerns could be escalated quickly and that agencies could work together more effectively. But this case also served as a reminder that no law or policy can replace the role of an engaged and observant community. Every adult has a part to play in protecting children. Speaking up can be difficult, but silence can have devastating consequences. What changes do you believe need to happen so no child slips through the cracks? Share your thoughts in the comments. We do read them, and subscribe to help us continue raising awareness for children who need a voice. After hearing Poppie's story, how do you feel about the fact that so many people saw troubling signs but didn't act until it was too late? If you were a teacher, a neighbor, or a doctor in a similar situation, what action would you take and how would you overcome the fear of getting it wrong? Let's discuss what we can all do to make sure a tragedy like this never happens again.